Wexworth Sidings is brought to you by whatever motivation I have left to make a video, and viewers like you. Thank you.
Well, I finally think it's about time I go into depth about how I made this model. I know you've all been really looking forward to seeing how I built this thing, and I think you've all been really patient in waiting for that. I apologise I haven't been able to get a better video out sooner, life has kinda happened, but without further ado, here is how I made 46619. I first had the idea to model this in April 2022, when I saw an edit on Twitter of a Riddles Standard Class 2 cut down to a 240. I unfortunately do not know who made this edit, so if whoever did make it is watching this video, thank you for inspiring me. The base model is a 1970s Hornby 2MT. This is when they were just coming out from being Triang and becoming Hornby Railways, so many of the chassis components are from Triang, such as the wheels being shared between Triang 3MTs and Ginties, and the chassis block being shared between the B12 and A3s, which meant working on the chassis would be really easy. The chassis work wasn't hard to do at all. Being a Triang chassis was relatively easy to disassemble, get all the wheels off, and prep everything for rebuilding. However, there were some compromises I needed to make. The main one being traction. Older Triang models generally have a magnet inside the chassis, which magnetizes the rear wheels, as back then they used steel wheels and steel rails, so this was a way to increase traction without increasing the weight of the model or the power of the motor. However, given what I needed to do, I had to cut out this magnet, as this is where the drawbar would mount to. Therefore, 46619, already it's being made lighter, but having the magnet removed means its traction has gone downhill, and it can only hold a couple of carriages. My next course of action was to modify the rear driving wheel. The reason I had to do this is because Triang models have a little brass crank pin on whichever axle has the Walschaerts valve gear attached, and in this case it was obviously the centre driver. Now these are actually modelled with this crank pin in mind, where they have a little indent on the backside of the wheel for the crank pin to fit into, and it's got like a squared off end so that it doesn't come out of alignment and the valve gear doesn't come out. So your model will always have the eccentric crank in the correct position. However, I had to move this to the rear driving wheel, and these are not modelled with that in mind. So I had to remount the crank pin and crankshaft with a round file until it was wide enough to fit the crank pin in. Then with a little bit of super glue on the end, that holds it in place and makes sure it doesn't come out during running. The chassis work was completed when I had the drawbar situation figured out and I had pickups made. The pickups consist of a piece of phosphor bronze soldered to a printed circuit board on the loco, and on the tender I've given it spare pickups off of Lima 040 tank engines. The drawbar is just a piece of plasticard, which uses the original drawbar peg on the tender, and on the loco there's just a screw glued to the bottom of the chassis. After I'd made sure the chassis ran properly and everything, it was time to do the body work. This involved cutting out the top feet to get it to the correct length, and cutting out the boiler backhead and the original screw mount at the rear to actually get it to fit around the motor and the modified chassis. The tender required cutting around the little cab end, well, I don't know what you call it, but the bit with the roof over it, and then cutting down the actual coal bunker and cutting down the rear end of the tender where the water cap is, and making sure all that all fits to the cut down chassis. Gluing the parts together, I used little braces made from plasticard inside the body, and then I filled it all with Milliput to make it all flush. And then it was primed and sanded until I found the correct finish and made sure it looked right. When all the priming, filling and sanding had been done, it was time to paint the model. I knew I wanted it to be in British Rail Blue, however I didn't know what colour to use. Whenever I was spray painting models before, I would use Silverhook's Gloss Blue, which my dad had bought for my 2009 Skoda Fabia to redo some of the paint on it, but we never got around to using it, and I ended up using it for modelling projects. But I'd run out of that, so I went to my local hobby shop and I bought myself some Tamiya paints. Specifically, Tamiya X4 was used for the main livery, Tamiya XF1 was used for the black, and I forget which one I used for the red, but it was also a Tamiya colour. Now, these Tamiya paints are made for use with an airbrush, however, I don't have one, and I didn't know that until after I'd started painting. So yes, this model is actually brush painted. And I don't think it turned out half bad. To all the people who told me you shouldn't hand paint with Tamiya, I strongly disagree. And then the 1MT just kind of sat there for a few months. I was waiting on money to get the decals ordered and everything, and when I did, I finally managed to finish up the model. I wouldn't say finish, I do want to get some other things for her, but she's most of the way there. The decals are generic white lining from Fox Transfers, as are the numbers. They are from a cab side set and a BR crest set. I would like to get some etched brass parts for the 1MT, namely a name board for either side of the tank, and then etched fittings for the smoke box, let's say the number plate and the shed code disc. But other than that, she's pretty much complete. If I were to do this model over again, there's a few things I probably would change. I think I'd maybe give it separate handrails and try and make it look a bit more professional, since it does look kind of weird with just the moulded handrails, but for my first attempt at a project this ambitious, I think I did alright.